Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Off-Farm Income Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us here again on our YouTube channel for episode number 868. Well, we are heading out to Kansas for this interview, and we are going to find out about the fascinating business of manure spreading. Now, that may sound like a paradox to you, but it is not. The equipment, the logistics, the science, the weed control, everything that goes into dealing with solid waste manure generated by feeding cattle is fascinating. How it gets dealt with and how it goes back into the earth. It's a great interview. Chadd Schmidt from Vars Incorporated is joining us, and we're going to get that started for you right now. Chadd, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey, you bet. I have been looking forward to it. I do this show, and on my Friday episodes, which is what you're appearing on, I interview people about small businesses and agriculture and the ways people can use entrepreneurship to either live where they want to live or to support their farming endeavors or whatever it may be. And so I've kind of got a running list of business types that I like to come back to and talk to people about. And I was looking for manure spreading, and I came across your website, Vars Incorporated. And man, you guys really do a nice job of marketing your service, but I'm looking at your equipment, and obviously there's a range in terms of manure spreading businesses, and you're probably on the upper end of that range, I'm thinking.
Well, I'm hoping we are.
Yeah.
We put a lot of time and effort into our equipment and growing the business, and we like to have quality equipment so we can do a good job for everybody. And the website, we'll have to give thanks to that to my sister. She put that together for us.
Yeah.
And does a real nice job with that. But we take a lot of pride in our equipment and our business, and try and keep everything up good for all of our customers. So
Very cool. Well, I've just recently started doing these interviews on Zoom. Forever, I've just done them over the telephone, and it gives me this unique perspective into people's lives. So I'm looking behind you, and obviously that is a clock made out of a windmill.
yes.
And I've never seen that before. Now, I'm not the type of guy to be like on Pinterest, perusing people's little projects. So I'm sure.
Well, lucky for you, my wife is.
And I was wondering about that. But that is a cool idea. That's a very cool idea. Okay.
I'll let her know. She'll be pleased.
All right. Well, let's talk about you for a minute, then we'll talk about business. So where do you live? What town, what state?
Arlington, Kansas. Small town, south central Kansas, about 400 or 500 people.
Okay.
It's in the middle of the heartland, I guess.
Yeah. And then
not a whole lot goes on here, just a lot of farming and cows, and that's the extent of it.
And did you grow up there? Is that where you're from?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I grew up about a mile down the road from where I live now, so I haven't branched out much.
Gotcha. Okay. And are you and your family, are you farming as well, in addition to your manure spreading business and your other enterprises?
Nope. We just do manure hauling.
Okay. So you're servicing
primarily everything that's involved with the feed yard. I've got a handful of cows that I play with, more of a hobby, but we more or less specialize in the back end of the cow. So.
Okay. I like that. So you grew up there, and then how long has this business been in your family?
I believe Dad and my mom started it in 1986.
1986. Okay. And was there a reason behind that, or was it your dad and your mom always wanted to have their own business, or do you know the origins of that?
Oh, Dad and Grandpa custom cut for years. They partnered on that, and it was just down the road from a feed yard in Turon is where they were based out of. And my dad worked at the feed yard in the wintertime just for something to do when they weren't cutting. And they had the opportunity to buy into the manure spreading deal there, and it eventually took off for him. He eventually bought Grandpa out and focused primarily on all manure hauling, and Grandpa did the custom cutting. And
well, and go ahead.
I just grew up in all of it together, and I always enjoyed the work and kind of wanted to come back to it. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at the website here, and in addition to manure spreading, you've got pen cleaning, excavator work, and also etc. So that's the all-encompassing. Whatever you need from us, we can do it. But how
Yep.
how
We're
is
not
it?
picky. We'll do what we need to do to make money.
So when you're talking about pen cleaning and the that type of work, are we talking about feedlots, or are we
Yes.
talking about smaller stuff?
Oh, all the above. We do pen cleaning at big yards. A big part of our business deals with starter yards, backgrounding yards, and we'll go through those. Generally once a year, and go through and clean all the pens, do any backfill work that needs to be done to get them to drain and get them back in shape, and then just haul the manure directly out of the pens on the farmer's ground. And then we got big yards that they primarily take care of all their pen cleaning. We just haul the manure out and spread it. So.
Okay. And then you've got another enterprise that's all your own. Is that right?
Yes, it's all tied into 4Bar. We operate together under 4Bar. When I first started back in '05, I bought my own equipment and ran with mom and dad. And then as things grew, we decided it'd be best to incorporate each of our entities just for liability purposes.
Okay.
So we essentially operate as a joint venture, but everything operates through 4Bar.
Gotcha. Okay. So how big of a radius around Arlington are you serving there?
Oh, primarily from north central Oklahoma all the way to the Nebraska line. So we go right 400 to 500 miles north to south and a couple hundred miles east to west.
So do you have any idea, just in the area you service, how many cattle on feed there are?
I wouldn't have a clue.
It's got to be millions, right?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a lot of cattle out here.
Yeah, a lot of cattle, a lot of feedlots. And then are feedlots your primary customer?
Yes. We don't do a whole lot of dairies anymore. Years ago, there's a lot of small dairies. We worked for 7,500, 100 head dairies, but they've kind of gone by the wayside. You just can't seem to make it anymore. But we've got a couple larger dairies that we help with periodically, but for the most part, it's all feed yard work.
And your typical feed yard that you have as a customer, how many cattle will they have there? I mean, we're talking a couple 100,000. We talking 1 million? What are we talking?
Oh no, a lot of the starter yards will be anywhere from say 500 to 2,000 or 3,000 head.
Oh, okay.
A lot of them, they farm and ranch as well, and then they'll background cattle for other people, or they'll have their own that they run through, and they get them in small, and they get them straightened out and get them growing, and they send them out to the feed yard to get fattened.
Okay.
That's a lot of them. And then we got a lot of bigger yards too that, they might be 30 to 40,000 head yards.
Okay.
They're just strictly finishing yards that we haul out of as well.
Okay. So I'm out in Idaho, so our feeding operations, they kind of pale in comparison to what is out in the Midwest. And, going through college and taking animal science classes and all that, I always heard about these huge feed yards out in the Midwest. I think they do exist, right, where they've got hundreds of thousands of head. But it's interesting, if you get a feed yard that big, my assumption would be that they probably buy their own equipment and do this themselves, but maybe I'm wrong.
A lot of the bigger yards, they've got pen cleaning crews, and they try and stay on top of it all the time. I mean, nobody wants to be custom feeding cattle somewhere and pull up to check on them and have them belly deep in manure. And so most feed yards put in a great deal of effort to keep their pens in good shape. But the smaller yards, that's something that kind of makes us unique. We go through those smaller yards, and we have the equipment to get in there and clean them all. A lot of those guys, they farm, they ranch. So, we go south into Oklahoma in the springtime, and they'll put a lot of weed up for hay and silage, or they'll graze it off. And when they get acres opened up for that, we'll come in and clean pens and get the manure hauled out. And then we more or less follow the harvest north from there.
Okay. So the reason I was asking you that is to me, there's kind of a window, there's kind of a niche in there where your bigger yards, they've probably got the equipment, they've got the personnel, so it makes sense to I guess, keep that in-house. But you get into your smaller feed yards, and it doesn't make sense for them to buy the equipment they need or to hire the people.
Well, a lot of it's just labor. They don't have the time, and they don't have the personnel around if they're trying to work ground or a starter yard. A lot of people don't know what all goes into that. It's you get those little calves in, and you're basically weaning them for somebody, and you got to run through and vaccinate them a lot, and just, it's a lot of babysitting, more or less, is what it is. So, the bigger yards, it's a lot easier. The cattle are straightened out, and they're in more, I guess, even groups. You don't have near the intensity on, having to watch and doctor them as much. And, and those yards are big enough. They're all operate like a bank. They finance the cattle, the feed, everything. They got a little bit deeper pockets and have more equipment and personnel to take care of it. So.
Sure. Okay, so how does let me ask you this. So with your business and everything you do you have an off season?
We don't really have an off season where we're located. We're very fortunate to be able to go south and pick up on wheat acres. So we've got that, and then in the fall we go up into north central Kansas, and we've got a lot we do there in the fall, and then typically get back around home in the wintertime, and there's a lot of irrigated ground around here and a lot of feed yards that are close, so we've got most of your irrigated ground, it's either corn or beans around here. When that comes off in the fall and winter, we've got a lot of acres to run on here. So fortunately, there's a couple times a year it slows down a little bit, usually September or so. Everybody's still waiting to get silage off or waiting to pick corn, and everybody's got their ground ready to start sowing wheat. It'll slow up a little bit, and then again in the spring, there's usually a window in there, March, April, somewhere in there, when we don't have any. They haven't put any wheat hay up yet, and everybody's got the ground ready to go back to corn, but just waiting on acres to open up. But for the most part, there's always something to do.
So, how many nights are you spending away from home in your business on an annual basis?
Oh, on an average year, it'll take us 4 to 6 weeks on our run down in Oklahoma, and we typically run 5 days a week, come home on the weekend. And then the same type of deal in the fall when we go up to northern Kansas, usually a month and a half or so. We always catch the time change in the fall and a lot shorter days, so sometimes that kind of drags it out. But a couple months on the road usually. You can usually plan on that.
And so how does it work? While all your territory, while Nebraska, Kansas, and Oklahoma are all in the midst of the growing season? Meaning, you've got cattle in the feed yards. They're continuing to create manure, but all the fields are actively growing. What do you do with the manure during that time?
Oh, like when we go down south, a lot of those yards, we just go through them once a year and scrape them and haul them out.
Okay.
A lot of times, if you get a wet spell and the pins get pretty bad, the farmers will go in there and they'll pile pins up, and if they need to haul it out, we can go help, or they'll get it hauled out and stockpiled outside. But as far as during a growing season, feeding never stops at a yard. You've got to get in there and clean pins and get it hauled out and stockpiled when you can, when the weather permits. And, it ranges from place to place. Some feed yards, they want it all out of the pens all the time, and they got designated places to pile. Or we'll bring equipment in, or a farmer or somebody will bring equipment in and we'll haul it out, and they'll just stockpile it on the edge of a circle on the corner, and the manure will be there ready to go when the crops come off. Or they'll pile it in the pens and use it for a mound for when the weather gets wet, and then we just haul it out, as we need it. So
they're keeping up with the maintenance and scraping and hauling and all of that, and then when it's time to spread it, that's when you guys are coming in.
Yep.
But what about the pin cleaning part of your business then? Is that just local customers? Are you piling it for them, or?
It just depends. I mean, a lot of places, they'll have a crew running around and they get the bulk of it done, and then when we come in, we'll give the pins a good deep clean and get everything hauled out and shaped back up so it'll drain. And it just depends on place to place. A lot of times, most typical feed yards, there's not somebody there all the time every day cleaning pins. It lays there and they pack it down. They'll pack that manure down to where it's about like concrete.
Yeah.
And then it just shows up when it gets wet and swells up and gets deep and muddy, and that's when everybody screams, "Need you there!"
We need you now. And you guys are wet right now, aren't you?
We are. We're currently in the middle of I think second or third wettest July that we've had since they've been keeping track of it.
No kidding. And is that true over in western Kansas as well?
They've had some rain out there, but I don't do enough out in western Kansas to really know a whole lot. They're usually substantially drier than we are.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was asking.
But they can grow twice as much on half the moisture too. So.
Okay. So you were talking about when weather permits. So with what you guys do, I mean, obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously. Here's what I'm picturing. When it comes to spreading manure, if it's wet, you guys just aren't going to be able to get that equipment out there. You're just going to get stuck, I would assume.
Yeah, you can't go out and tear the fields up.
Yeah.
When it gets super wet and the pins get bad, I mean, there's a lot of times you've just got to mud it out of the pins just to get it out so the cattle have a dry place to lay. But as far as getting on the field, you've got to be very timely with what you do to get it on without tracking it up. And,
sure.
And you get a lot of no-till guys and don't want any compaction, and you got to be very careful with what you do. So
that's interesting. Okay, so that's what I was going to ask about. When it gets wet and people are hollering at you that they want these pins cleaned out, you've got the right equipment. You can get into those pins and clean them out, even in wet weather.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can get the manure out, but you can't necessarily
spread it.
You're not necessarily going to go spread it.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Now with your no-till guys, even if the conditions are right, I would assume you've got to have certain tires or something like that, or certain pressures to keep from compacting that ground when you spread.
Yeah, we run flotation tires on all of our spreaders and our tractors, and we run across a variety of ground. You get up in north central Kansas, and it's fairly hilly and a lot heavier black dirt, and it doesn't take much to compact it at all. You get down here where we're at in the sand, up there you get a quarter or half inch of rain and it shuts you down for a day or two. Down here in the sand, you pray for a hard inch of rain just so you can get across some of this.
Sure. Now I'm looking at the gallery on your website, and I'm looking at the equipment you guys are using. Is all the equipment I'm seeing here, do you haul that down to Oklahoma for that 4 to 5 week stretch you're down there?
No, we rode it everywhere. We haul the loaders, but the tractors, they run 43 mile an hour. It's just as fast to drive them as it is to try. They're 65 feet long, so you can't load them and haul them in one shot. You got to split them.
Okay. So you're pulling it looks like there's the one manure spreader with the 3 axles, the green one. Is that the main one you have? Is that the only one you have, or?
Yeah, we've got 4 of those.
You've got 4 of those. Okay. I knew you were big time on this, top end on this. Okay, so interesting. So what's the logistics when you've got to go that far and you've got to get all that equipment down there? How many people do you have running equipment down?
Oh, typically I've got somebody in every tractor, and depending on the size of the job, we may or may not have anybody in the loader. Like when we move to go down south, those yards are relatively small. You'll probably be there a couple days at each place by the time you scrape the pins and haul it out and you're ready to move to the next one. So like down there, we'll have somebody in the loader, somebody in all the tractors, and I do most of the pin cleaning ahead of them. So typically when we leave here, we'll load the loader and haul it. And by the time we get down there and get unloaded at the first job and get ready, the tractors are pulling in the drive. It doesn't take them near. Everybody thinks, oh my goodness, you're going to go 120 miles with a tractor. It's going to take forever, but you can do it in 3 hours or less.
Sure. Okay.
It takes 2 to 2.5 to drag a piece of equipment down there with a truck. So.
Okay. Now I'm looking at the spreader, and you've got 4 of those. That's the biggest spreader I've ever seen. Is that the biggest one available?
Oh, it's one of the biggest. There's several different types and kinds. Those are 34 foot. The model's a 34, 48, 34 foot, 4 foot sidewalls, and a 48 ton suspension. They make one with a 50 ton hydraulic suspension as well, but these are just a mechanical spring. They're pretty reliable and seem to be a lot simpler.
And you generally loading them all the way up to 48 ton?
No, 40 to 45. A lot of it depends on the distance we're going.
Okay.
If you got it stockpiled in the field, you can run 45 ton on them and get away with it all the time.
Okay.
By the time you figure a little bit of tongue weight to the tractor and the weight of the spreader, you can't put 48 on you. Well, I mean, there's guys that put 50 to 60 on them, but
sure,
you tear stuff up. So
yeah,
a lot of our you get further out western Kansas and out in the Panhandle. Very rarely do most of those guys haul out of a feed yard with a spreader. Primarily, all of that gets hauled out with end dumps and stockpiled at the field.
Okay.
Where we go and we directly clean the pens, haul it right out, all in one swoop, I guess. We might be going right across the road. We might go 2 or 3 miles down the road. So as far as the weight we carry, it just kind of depends on how far we have to go with it, because your tires, they don't
right.
handle the weight of the speed. So
right. Now when you're spreading out of that, how, let's say you got 40 tons of manure in there, how long until you're empty?
That's $100 question. It just depends on those spreaders. Depending on the manure, you can usually get at least 30 foot, a lot of times 40 to 50 foot of spread width consistently.
Okay.
So we just try and match our tonnage to our field. A common rate is 20 ton to the acre. So if we got 40 ton on, we'll just set up at 33 feet wide. That's 2 acres and a half mile. Most fields down here are square quarters, so they're half mile by half mile. But one thing that these things have allowed us, you get in northern Kansas where we go, and there's a lot more terraced ground, and the fields are cut up with waterways and creeks and everything else, and you don't have a square shot. So, if you can spread 55 or 60 foot wide, you just set up at your maximum width, and all of these have scales and rate controllers on them. So you just tell it you want to put down 20 ton or 15 ton or however much, and it maps it all out. You just drive till you run out, and allows you to be a lot more efficient.
Okay, interesting. So let's say you're just at a typical rate you're going across. It's taken how long to get that trailer empty and to go back and fill it again? Oh,
on average, you'll probably run 5 to 7 mile an hour across the field, so not very long. I mean, on a typical deal, if we're cleaning out or loading out of somebody's pens and going a mile down the road with it, we'll get between 2 and 3 miles an hour.
Okay. Now the guys around where I live, they're all spreading it, but then they're working it in, they're disking it in and doing all of that. But your no-till guys, they're just, I guess, what would we call it, top dressing? I mean, it's just going right on top.
Yep. Yeah, they a lot of them don't do anything with it. They're pretty strict no-tillers.
Okay.
That's another thing where our equipment comes in. The vertical beaters we run, they pretty well grind that stuff into powder.
Okay.
So when it lays out there, you've got a lot faster nutrient uptake from the plant, because just a little bit of moisture will dissolve it and take it right into the ground,
right into the soil. And so if you're doing it on a no-till field, do you reduce your rate?
No, not typically, but you can kind of the biggest thing you're going to lose by no-tilling manure is your nitrogen's volatile in fresh manure. That's what you smell when you go down the road and you drive by somebody that's doing it. But if you've got aged manure or you've composted it, you've essentially taken the volatility out of the manure, and it'll lay there and it'll just go in as you get rain. So, but if you're hauling raw manure right out of a pen, you will lose some of your nitrogen out there.
Mm-hmm. So when you say composting it, you read all this stuff about composting, but when you're talking about composting, you're just talking about piling it and storing it and waiting to spread it?
Essentially, some people do a true compost where they've got a turner and they'll windrow it.
Oh, is that right?
And they've got, I don't even know, they're huge machines to turn the piles. And essentially, if you're going to make a true compost, a lot of times you'll have to add a carbon source of some sort,
right,
whether it's straw or hay or whatever. But you've really got to manage it. You want it to be over 130 degrees for X amount of days. That will, at that temperature, it will kill the germ and your weed seeds and anything else that's in there. And that's a big plus for some guys. But other guys, they'll just, they'll stockpile it outside their pens. They'll just windrow it with a dump truck and, let it sit for several months, or even, pile this year's manure out, spread last year's manure, and then pile this year's outside of the pens and let it sit, and kind of cook down and mellow out.
So that's interesting. So I was going to ask you, why would somebody choose to go to the extra work and the extra expense of doing a true compost? And I was going to ask you if it that much more impactful in yield and in nitrogen content, but that elimination of weed seed, that might just be the answer right there.
Yeah, that's huge. Roundup doesn't seem to work like it used to.
No.
Neither does anything else.
That's interesting. Well, that's great. That's great to hear, though, because I'm considered an agricultural advocate. I'm doing this show, talking to thousands of people, and always advocating for agriculture. And the stories you hear, the only stuff that gets press is stuff about like glyphosate and stuff like this, and all these scare stories and things like that. But you guys are figuring out ways through composting on a large scale to eliminate the need for that type of stuff and to come up with another solution to deal with weed seed and with weeds.
Yeah, and it does help substantially. There's a lot of guys that, it won't be a true compost. They'll just turn it a couple of times, get it to heat up, and essentially try and kill that germ. And obviously that's going to help a lot, but it's still so much management on the farmer's end.
Yeah.
Doing their homework with what varieties they're going to plant and the pre-emergence they put down. Because I'm a firm believer that, most of the feed yards I deal with, they're feeding ground hay and corn. There's so much more in manure other than NP and K. That's what most people, that's what you're going to go buy from the co-op. And so that's what everybody bases their pricing off of. But the biggest thing out of the manure, you get all your organic matter and your micronutrients. That's what really makes the soil pop. Your nitrogen is just a bonus. Most manure is very, very high in phosphorus. So, if you can come close on your phosphorus expense to cover that, everything else you get out of the manure is a bonus. But that's, when you're talking about spending $70, $80, $100 an acre, depending on how far you're hauling it, to apply manure, it's hard to convince somebody that it's a bonus.
So let me ask you about that part of the business, because that's interesting to me. You've got such a wide-ranging area you're servicing. How have you found all these customers, from north to south and east to west?
Word of mouth.
Word of mouth. Okay.
We have never formally advertised. It's all just been neighbors talking to neighbors, and people feed cattle down here. People feed cattle all over, and if you're in there doing a good job, and somebody drives by and sees it, it travels pretty quick. But really, My sister put the website together for us probably 4 or 5 years ago, maybe.
Okay.
And I've got a handful. Well, this, for example, I mean, you found us.
Yeah, I found you that way.
On the internet, but I have had a few people that have found us on the internet, but I'd say probably 95% of it's all word of mouth. So.
Okay. And it's interesting too, because once you have a very interesting business in that there's nothing you can do. You've got to get that manure out of the pens. So the farmer, the feeder, they got no options. That has to come out one way or another. Now the spreading is option B. What are you going to do with it if you don't spread it? So when you're talking about, I guess, negotiating price or naming your price with your customers, maybe a new customer, and they're not seeing these other things as a bonus because of what they're going to pay. I mean,
well, most guys that have feed yards, I mean, they've fed and they've we're competing more on having the equipment, having a big enough volume of equipment to come in, and if somebody's wanting to pull corn silage off and spread something and double crop it back to wheat so they have something to graze this winter, they don't want somebody that's going to come in there and take 3 weeks to clean their pens out and bring one truck in and slowly chip away at it. They want somebody that's going to come in and do it right and get it done and get out of there. And that's what we try to do.
Gotcha. So as long as you're priced right in the marketplace, then that's really not the issue. The more important things are speed of delivery and how quickly you can get the job done.
Yep, that does a lot of it.
Okay. Now, how much competition are you looking at in your region?
Oh, it depends on where we're at. There's a handful of other people right around home here that do it, but very few to the scale, I guess, that we do. Grandpa Custom Cut went from Texas to Montana, and
wow,
he retired when I was still in middle school. But I always remember going out and looking at the equipment, and we'd go visit them when they're on the road, and I was just in awe of the custom cutting crews going, and always like that. And I don't go near to that scale, but I mean, we are willing to travel, and it takes, the amount of equipment we've got, you've got to get out and move just to keep enough material ahead of you to keep making payments. So.
Yeah, man. So it's interesting. You've got a family history of people who think big. Texas to Montana.
I guess so.
Texas to Montana. The only time I've heard of that is when I read the book Lonesome Dove. But no, that's great.
We just weren't smart enough to go get a job in town. So.
You know what? Would you ever though?
Probably not.
No, I know. So, and out here where I live in Idaho, when we talk about custom cutting, we're almost always talking about hay, but you're talking about grain, right? Wheat.
Yep. He went to Texas and cut wheat all the way from Texas to Montana, and then they'd come back. And years ago, they used to go all the way down to Louisiana in the fall and cut soybeans and come back up through Oklahoma and back to home cutting fall crops. But yep, they pretty well did all of it. Fascinating
stuff. Okay. Well, so you're running a crew, I'm assuming, and does your crew fluctuate with the seasons? I know you said you go pretty much year round, but do you need as many people?
For the most part, we stay pretty steady with the number of employees. Like most small businesses, we're always looking for somebody here and there, but for the most part, we usually have primarily the same guys.
So I always love to ask advice. Say somebody else out there, somebody in Virginia wants to start this business, maybe even on obviously if they're starting it, they're going to be on a much smaller scale than you guys are on. And I always like to ask advice for somebody who's starting up, but sometimes I like to turn it around and ask, what is what's been the biggest wreck you've had where you could tell somebody, don't ever do this?
Well, weather plays a huge part in what we do. So It gets wet, you can't run, but you don't become complacent in what you're doing. You've got to become very flexible in this line of work, and you can't just rely on one avenue of what you're doing. to provide everything. You've got to be able to adjust. You can't just get in a rut of going from place to place and know that everybody's going to do the same work every year. And because one year somebody will change it up, or, they won't have as much, or they'll have somebody else in there. And that'll just snowball down the road. It just throws your whole timing and schedule off, and makes it tough to get through.
Absolutely. What do you do when the weather pushes your schedule? You had 6 weeks of work planned out, and it now pushes it, and you've got 3 weeks to get it done. How do you deal with that?
You just get 6 weeks worth of work done in 3 weeks.
Just that simple. You have really good lights on your equipment.
You just get it done, and there's some flexibility too. A lot of guys, 90% of our customers are repeat customers.
Mm-hmm.
We do our best to get to them when they need us, but at the same time, they're living in the same region as we are. So if it's wetter than hell through here, they're not getting their farm work done either. So, if we don't happen to catch it now and it gets pushed back till they pull silage off this fall, if we can't get over the wheat ground or whatever, most of them have flexibility too. Mm-hmm. So,
it's interesting. I've got a small farm out here where I live in Idaho, but I'm pretty close to Boise. And I am jealous of you for the fact that you live in an area where everybody's got, and I'm making an assumption, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm jealous of you for living in an area where everybody's got kind of the same mindset, meaning everybody understands what the weather means, everybody understands what the season means, and even if they're not directly farming, they understand the stresses and why people are busy, why people aren't busy because of weather and what's going on in agriculture. And I'd love to live in a place where everybody was kind of their mindset was based around that. Yeah,
that's probably not necessarily all true. Just the crowd of people I deal with and run around with. You live or die by the weather. So
sure,
it's got such a huge importance to everything that we do. Right now I've got a lot of acres to cover up. Typically by 1st of September, everybody's got ground close to ready to go to start planting wheat. Into September, sometime in October, they'll start planting wheat. And, so I get kind of nervous when it's wet like this because I've got a tremendous amount of ground to get over. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I'm fortunate to have repeat customers that, know that we're not just packing up and leaving. If we can't get it, if it's wet and I've got to move on, they understand, and we try and get back to them and do it when we can. So
yeah. Do you have customers where, when things are going right in the feed cattle business, they've got all their pens full and you get there to clean out pens or to do this? Where do they put the cattle? Do they have a spare pen they can move cattle into?
Most of your big finishing yards, there's not empty pens. There's never.
Okay.
A lot of them guys, in fact, they might catch a slump in the growing season where they're not clear full, but generally those big feed yards, they do a really good job at what they do, and they've got a waiting list of people wanting to send cattle to them. So those yards, there's somebody there that when weather permits, they're scraping pins and doing maintenance all the time.
Okay, so they're scraping.
A lot of the smaller yards, like the starter yards we go to.
Yeah.
This year with COVID, there was a number of them that didn't have any cattle in them, or the lowest number of cattle that I had ever seen in a lot of them, and a lot of that was just due to, their custom starting cattle for people, and those big buyers, they might be from around here, they might be back east, they're just investors. It's a numbers deal to them. They need so many cattle on feed to make it work out, and they didn't pencil out, so they just weren't sending cattle. Fortunately, a lot of them are starting to slowly fill back up. But,
good.
I know it was getting pretty scary there for a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one last question for you, and just for the person who's listening to this and they're going, I'm interested in this and I'd like to get started doing this. And even on the guys that are going to start on a very, very small scale, used equipment, if they want to start out and they want to buy used rather than new to save that money, with the, you're hauling all this manure, all this urine that's mixed into it. Is it worth it to buy used equipment, or is that stuff just going to be eaten through by the time they get to it in terms of the metal and stuff like that?
Oh, you've got to go over it with a fine tooth comb and know what you're looking for. We've bought a lot of used equipment over the years,
Mm-hmm.
and you got to, somebody's selling it for a reason.
Right.
You got to keep that in the back of your mind. But on the other hand, it doesn't matter if you buy something brand new. We're very abusive to the equipment with what we do,
Mm-hmm.
beating it across fields and carrying that much weight. I mean, you're going to have breakdowns one way or the other. You about have to become a full-time mechanic to go along with your business. So
Absolutely. Well, Chadd, this is really, really interesting. I really appreciate the time. I know you're probably not thankful for the rain, but it's benefiting me today because I get to talk to you and do it on Zoom. But thank you so much for coming on and sharing this with us.
Yep, appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for being here, everybody. Thank you to Chadd Schmidt for spending the time and sharing all that great information with us today. And as always, enjoy your journey to the ultimate lifestyle business, agriculture.